Oh hey, fancy seeing you here. Anyway, I'm not gonna. Whoa, sorry, just kind of accidentally twitched and my laptop nearly went flying. Excellent. Anyway, right, I'm not gonna do an intro because I know why I'm here. You should know why I'm here. Otherwise, why are you here, man? But thank you for being here. Let's watch Rio de Janeiro, April 7th, 1828. 1820. It's going to be in the late 1820s, right? Because right now, his Pedro the First has died, and after going to Brazil and putting his what was it? It was his son. No, his niece. No, it was his daughter, who was originally married to his brother. That's really rank. And then he left his son, who I think was called Pedro, in charge of Brazil, Pedro II, and then he died of tuberculosis, of TB, and yeah, so that should bring us to 1825, 1827, something, I don't know. Let's keep watching because I'm very interested.
April 7th, 1831.
Ooh,
The
that's close,
crowds are celebrating. Emperor Pedro I, deeply unpopular and seen as a foreigner and enemy of freedom, has just abdicated the throne. He's given in to both public and official pressure and will leave for Portugal. But to the people, this isn't an abdication. It's a revolution, like a second Independence Day. The crowd expectantly stares at the balcony, waiting to see their new emperor, Pedro II. A boy born in Brazil, one they can raise as a native son while teaching him the principles of constitutional government. A Brazilian emperor for a Brazilian nation.
Yeah.
They see a shape emerge. Their new monarch looks down on them, and they cheer. From the ground, however, they don't see that the 5-year-old Pedro is too small to look over the balcony railing. And in order to make himself tall enough to be seen, the child emperor is standing on a chair.
When I was 5,
Thanks so much to Bright Sellers for raising a glass to history and sponsoring this episode.
feeling kind of
When Pedro
inadequate.
I left for Portugal, he left a country in crisis and children who would never see him again. With Brazil torn between political factions, economically drained by wars and revolts, and still bitterly divided on issues like regional autonomy and slavery, Pedro was under no illusion that things would be difficult for his young son once he became king at the age of 18. So, to help with that transition, Pedro asked his old friend, José Bonifacio de Honrada, one of his key allies during independence, to be his child's guardian and private tutor. Though it should be noted that years before, he had actually exiled Andrada over his actions during the Night of Agony, but by 1831, he was back, with Pedro realizing there was no one he trusted more. Brazil's 1824 constitution had made provisions for a regency, and the General Assembly's appointment of 3 regents initially went smoothly. But it soon became clear that Pedro's abrupt departure and the weak executive power of the regents had allowed all of Brazil's long-term problems to boil over at once. See, Brazil covered a huge amount of territory, which included different ecology, agricultural systems, and histories. Some that previously had Dutch settlements also had differing trade patterns, with heavier economic exchange with Europe and Africa than the other provinces of Brazil. And all those provinces, some of whom, like the northern province Pernambuco, who rebelled regularly, were furious about the centralization of power in Rio when their local needs were rarely addressed. The imperial government, it seemed, was only interested in levying high taxes. Slavery, too, was an unresolved issue. In 1826, Brazil had signed a treaty with the UK banning the importation of slaves. But Brazil still had an enormous population of enslaved Africans. In addition, because any child born from a free father and an enslaved mother was born free, there was also a large and growing population of free people of color, some of whom themselves owned slaves. Indeed, by ending the importation of slaves, British and Brazilian abolitionists had hoped to phase slavery out, but that wasn't happening, particularly because slave importers were not abiding by the ban. Oh wow, imagine that! Similarly, while the 1824 Constitution insisted...
God, that is so complicated. Yeah. God. You know, the issue of the abolition of slavery in Brazil, because like I think they were saying 40% of all slaves in the Americas went to Brazil. It's really like I know nothing about it, and I like to think that I did pay attention during history. I didn't do it for GCSE. I did it for A level, and obviously had to do it before GCSEs. But we never really looked at much Latin American history. And even then, when you do, Spain and the Spanish colonies usually take precedence over Brazil and Portugal and other Portuguese colonies. But yeah, this is just the centralisation of power in Rio de Janeiro. It's obviously going to piss off a lot of places because, yeah, the Dutch nearly took over Brazil, and I didn't realise that their presence was so long-lasting. Like, I wonder if there's a lot of people that still speak Dutch. It looks sort of like Bahia. I don't know how to pronounce it. Bahia or something. Bahia. Either way. Yeah. Interesting.
Oh wow, imagine that. Similarly, while the 1824 Constitution insisted all non-enslaved men were equal and gave citizens the vote regardless of race, Brazil's non-white population still experienced discrimination on a daily basis. Then, of course, there were Brazil's indigenous inhabitants, who, while protected by law from slavery, were still similarly ill-treated and underrepresented in government. So, realizing there was a real danger of the country fracturing, the General Assembly tried to provide better representation with an 1834 constitutional amendment called the Additional Act, establishing local assemblies and giving provinces greater autonomy. It actually made things worse, as local factions tried to dominate the new provincial governments, and the central government lost more authority, leading to more separatist uprisings. Revolts of all shapes and sizes sent the provinces in the north and south into tumult as they tried to declare independence or insist that Pedro II take his throne immediately. Slave uprisings stormed towns and were brutally suppressed by the central government or its newly established National Guard. Free men of color staged civil rights marches where they demanded equality. Attempted revolutions united indigenous leaders, slaves, army officers, and plantation owners in sometimes bizarre alliances with few common causes.
What? How is this? This is just chaos. That's the word. The only thing I know about the Latin American Wars of Independence and the ensuing chaos is that it was just chaos. Like, that's what I recall from the Simone Bolivar episodes. Like, with just such disparate groups of people. It's just, how would these people come together? I don't understand. Like, it's fascinating. I need to watch more stuff on this.
Apart from dissatisfaction with the Regency, Portuguese residents were particularly vulnerable, and at times were thrown out of towns and murdered by mobs. And in 1835, an uprising among enslaved African Muslims came close to taking an entire city. In fact, there were so many revolts, it's actually difficult time-wise to discuss each of them individually. Heck, in 1839 alone, there were 7 major uprisings. Yeah, 7 in 1 year. By 1840, the court and legislature had decided there was only one solution to unite the country and end the reign of anarchy. Pedro II must take the throne. Now, constitutionally, he wasn't supposed to be able to do that until his 18th birthday, which was still 4 years away. But they were worried that the country wouldn't last that long without splitting up. And, funny thing about princes, they don't actually have birth certificates at this point, so... Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, please bail us out, Pedro. Happy birthday to you. And many more.
That's really funny. Fair enough. What is it they say? Improvise, adapt, overcome.
I mean, we joke, but actually not by much. Pedro himself was, ironically, the last person to be told about the plan, and took the throne at the mature age of 15. Now, what exactly was he doing the whole time before that, you might ask? Well, mostly being hidden from the instability. For 9 years, this poor kid had lived in lonely isolation, allowed to see no other children except his sister, and made to devote all but 2 of his waking hours each day to studying. The result was a knowledgeable young man who appreciated art, spoke multiple languages, and knew the Constitution inside and out, but who also hated being emperor. Feelings of resentment that only grew deeper when he entered a respectful but passionless political marriage with a Sicilian princess. Though it does just bear mentioning that while Pedro II did have affairs, unlike his father, he kept them quiet. And just to be clear, this all sounds nuts, right?
Brazilian, man. Nah, just princes, man. Royalty, you know. Princes in my country are a bit like that. It's just they like him a bit younger and a bit more human trafficky.
Thinking that after all of these rebellions and revolts, some of them Republican in nature, everyone was just going to rally around a teenage king? Come on. Except, and I can't make this up, everyone, it worked. Things calmed down, especially after Pedro had children and started taking a more active hand in government. Stuff just cooled off. And the political parties decided instead of being at each other's throats constantly, they could be a generally ineffectual elite class taking turns in government. Progress? Now, of course, there were still some revolts, but fewer and thus easier to suppress. And in 1850, Brazil truly turned the corner when it decided to finally start abiding by its 1826 agreement to end the importation of slaves. Until then, the government had been complicit in allowing it to continue. And, you know, a funny thing happened. See, importing slaves was one of the largest industries in Brazil, but because it was off the books, it couldn't be taxed. So suddenly, everyone pulled their money out of illegal slave transportation and put it into legitimate businesses, especially in expanding plantations to feed Europe and North America's enormous appetite for coffee. Brazil's financial problems disappeared practically overnight. The government had tons of money to lay roads to link the country, erect new public buildings, and finally pave the streets of the cities. And Rio became an urban center on the Paris model, with theaters and art galleries and a rambunctious urban culture of fashion and civic life. Pedro also launched a major cultural renaissance, hoping to link his diverse and widely distributed population by creating a sense of nationalist unity. He commissioned paintings, poems, operas, and novels depicting the great events of Brazilian history and the country's unique geography and ecology. He founded a symphony and...
Yeah. Wanna have a what? Oh, yeah! Right, sorry guys. Pedro II has gone on a campaign, I don't know, to increase feelings of like fraternity, I don't know, feeling of like national unity, citizenship, I guess, by commissioning plays, operas, poems, history, music, you know, that kind of stuff, all relating to Brazilian, pardon me, sorry, all relating to Brazilian culture and, you know, nationality and Brazil. Anyway, let's carry. I'm just going to go back 20... Oh, God, sorry, hiccups.
And most of all, he commissioned paintings, poems, operas, and novels depicting the great events of Brazilian history and the country's unique geography and ecology. He founded a symphony, and most of all, sponsored historians to write the definitive story of how Brazil came to be. Now, of course, this was a fiction, an imagined past meant to link Brazilians and emphasizing the idea of a European-style constitutional monarchy in the tropics. Many of these plays, novels, poems, and paintings celebrated the noble Indian as a symbol of this new nation, despite the fact that the indigenous people had no representation in government and were, even then, being brutalized and marginalized. Now, it probably won't surprise you to also learn that these treatments of Brazilian history rarely, if ever, mention slavery in a country that, we should remember, was mostly black and mixed race. A fact that was becoming ever more uncomfortable to Brazil's elite, to the point that the government brought in European immigrants in hopes of whitening it. Yet as the United States finally abolished its own slave system following the Civil War, the writing was on the wall for Brazil. They, along with Cuba, were now the only slave states in the Americas. It was an issue that would need to be reckoned with soon. But there was also another major crisis on the horizon. As Pedro reached the height of his power, and Brazil started to look at laying rail lines and telegraph wires across its vast distances, war threatened on its southern border. A Paraguayan war that would suck Brazil in and change everything for the empire.
Right.
Oh man.
I don't know if it's this war, but I've heard about a war in Paraguay, the War of the Third Coalition, or something like that. The War of the Third, something like that. And it was about Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil against Paraguay. I'm not sure why, but yeah, it killed a hell of a lot of people in Paraguay. Brutal. One of the most deadly wars, like if you measure it a certain way, in history. That was really interesting. Sorry, I know I keep disappearing during the filming, but it's just awkward timing, people coming in. But regardless, I really enjoyed that. So in this episode, chapter 4, Pedro II, who I got wrong, he turns out to be the one that leads Brazil until 1888, I think. 1887. And yeah, he comes to power at the ripe old age of 15. And yeah, somehow the country gets pulled back together and there's less revolts and stuff, so I guess good, but it's mad how that's happened. I can't believe that. But yeah, this was a very interesting video. Very interesting. I am, of course, going to give it a like. Thank you so much if you're still watching this. I really can't wait for the next episode. I really can't wait. So this was released 19th of Feb, and it is the 20th of Feb today. Okay, so it's not going to be too... Oh, man. I want to watch this. When was the last one released? Extra credits, videos... 2 weeks. Okay, so they're doing them like every week. Oh man, that means I've got to wait a week for the next episode. But regardless, I'm sure you guys will wait. Speaking of, if you're still watching, thank you so much. Beijinhos. And I'll see you in the next episode. What did he say it was going to be called?
And Zoe, I can't wait to see how this series concludes next week. To look at a Paraguayan war.
Breaking bonds. Okay, cool. Anyway, right. Oh, and that might also talk about slavery. Breaking the bonds of slavery. Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Anyway, see you there, guys. Bye.